This morning we're going to look at the first 5 books, the law, the Torah. And I had you look at Genesis 1 and 2 because most people don't realize, the average person reading the Bible doesn't realize that 1 and 2 are actually 2 different stories of creation. And yes, oh good, we got a nod. You knew that.
Inventing God again.
Yeah. So those 2 different creation stories are really important because, first of all, it shows us that there was more than one writer at work. Because if it was the same writer, the story would be the same. It would be told the same way. And that's why we did this exercise, just so we could see the differences between how the story is told, down to even how God is referred to. And that's important as well because it speaks to a larger issue that is at work throughout the Old Testament. And that larger issue is there one God? So when we're studying the Old Testament, we're not going to get into all of these, but if you ever pick up the Bible again and read it, the Old Testament, these are some contrasts that you're going to notice or you want to notice. So the first contrast is finding God within you. Whoops, now we're going to have a pad on that audio. Finding God within you versus finding God through prescribed worship, as in going to the temple and having the priest perform a sacrifice for you, or someone telling you what you should do in order to communicate with God. So that's always a conflict, and you can see these conflicts pulling back and forth. Sometimes the way you tell it's a conflict is because there's so much against the other way of doing something. So like this last one, this struggle between traditions of sacrifice and non-sacrifice. And Scott spends, usually when we're doing classes with Scott, he makes a point of pulling in the passages where God's saying, I don't want your sacrifices. That's not what I wanted from you. In the Old Testament, you'll see stories of child sacrifice, and the ban, no, 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 no on that. The reason they're doing that is because it was happening. And so the writers were speaking out against something that was happening over and over again. I mean, the story of Abraham, what we're going to look at, what does he do with his son Isaac? He tries to sacrifice him, and God says, no, don't do that. We'll do something else. Okay? So whenever you see this push-pull, and then there are rules about don't do something, the reason those rules are there is because people are doing it. That's an important thing to remember. Okay, the second is this contrast between community rule and monarchy rule. We're probably not going to really get into the Judges, which is the centuries of rule where somebody just rose up from the ranks to lead in times of crisis. Otherwise, people just got along in the community and did what needed to be done. And then they got to a point where they wanted a king. Everybody else has a king. We need a king. And so you've got this contrast of people who are wanting to urbanize and get into this city setting and have a ruler and a standing army to protect them from all these invading tribes around them, and people who don't want someone as an overlord. They want to continue as a community and just be risen up as needed. The third struggle is the struggle between nomadic independence and urban settlement, which goes hand in hand with that, someone rising up and someone being a king. And then again, the contrast of monotheism with polytheism or pantheism, and we're going to see that this morning, if hopefully we can get there. So back in Genesis 1 and 2, Here's an example of monotheism versus polytheism. One name for God is Yahweh, or Lord, if you're reading in your Bible. The other is Elohim, which El means God, and it's a Canaanite god. Elohim literally means gods, which fits well within the Canaanite tradition. So you've got this contrast of this one group of people that's saying this God, Yahweh, against another group of people that are saying gods. We worship the gods. And you'll see that in the Ten Commandments. What's the first? Do you know your Ten Commandments? We're going to look at them in a minute. What's the first commandment?
You should have no other gods before me.
That's right. It didn't say there are no other gods. It said you shall have none before me.
Yeah, he comes first.
Right.
Before you worship anybody else.
Yeah. And the argument that's trying to unfold within the New Testament is this one group of people that has this bizarre, to this part of the world, idea that you only need one God. That one God can provide everything. God is all-powerful. God is all-knowing. God is all, whatever the other one is. It's escaping me this morning. So,
Present, omnipresent.
Thank you. God is always present. So there's this conflict, and this speaks to the history that is unfolding over hundreds of years as tribes are merging and splitting and becoming one with this Israelite group that follows Yahweh and then not. And that leads to the next one, the contrast between separation from other groups and absorption into other groups. And that's part of this early history of people combining and bringing their traditions with them. And as you look at the later writers who are framing and reshaping their history to better reflect what they think is the truth, you'll see where they've gone back and said, merging with other people is bad. We must be separate. And this whole story arises about how we are chosen and separate and special, and we must keep to ourselves. So much so that Judaism, if you are a Jew in the world today, it's an ethnicity. It's not just a religion. You can be a Jewish person and not practice the Jewish faith. It's an ethnicity. It's about who you've, in your history, you've married with, and it needs to be within this lineage. So there's this contrast as well, and you can see the later authors, kind of wrestling with it when you read stories about King David, who's going and marrying all kinds of women from all over the place to make these alliances, and the priestly writers and the Deuteronomic writers are saying, bad, 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 that's not good, that's trouble's going to come to you.
Samson too, I guess.
Yeah. And you can see it throughout the history. Every time, Solomon was another one who was, God loved Solomon, but Solomon was marrying other women too, and that came back to bite him. So it's...
Manasseh is one.
Yeah, Manasseh, and that's a great lead-in for the Apocrypha. Manasseh was another king who, by all accounts, if you look at it from history's standpoint, was a great king. He did wonderful things for his followers. But for some reason, the authors didn't like him and threw him under the bus. And part of it was because of who he married. So those are things to keep in mind as you're reading, the little nuggets of what's happening in the background that explains why this history is so rich and conflicting. So let's look at these conflicting things. Genesis tells us 2 stories. So, what did you find in Genesis 1? What are some things that look different from the second creation account?
Well, God created the
Everything.
world, the universe,
The earth
all
was
that
formed.
is, in 7 days.
Yeah.
Actually, he created them in 6 because on the 7th day he rested.
Yeah, they thought God got tired. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
God got tired and had to have a day off.
No, think about it theologically. God resting on the 7th day means that we need to rest the 7th day.
Yeah, I can
It's,
get that.
it provides a theological reason for the law of the Sabbath, which should tell you who wrote this first
Right.
account as
Exactly.
well.
But that wasn't days either, was it? It was
Right. We can't,
billions of years.
yeah, we don't know what a day was, first of all, because God created them. It started out, there were no days or nights, right? Creation of the world, it was formless and void. And then something changed, right? Yes, Ruach, the Spirit of God, came and started forming things. So God created, oh, I'm on the wrong slide, I'm sorry. Genesis tells 2 stories. 1 through 11 is about the general creation of the world and the people in it. And so you've got all these major stories that you may have heard: creation of the world, the story of Adam and Eve, the fall and disgrace. And in the Hebrew it says that Adam and Eve were vomited out of Eden. Just, there's one of those little words you're never going to see in English, but that's how it was described. They were vomited out of Eden. Cain and Abel, and then the flood and the Tower of Babel. So you've got all those stories that if you went to Sunday school as a kid, you heard them. Are you raising your hand?
I am.
Yes.
I don't know how far down. Anyway, God said, let us make man in our own image.
Mhm.
The first creation.
Yes.
The second creation, he put Adam to sleep and got a rib.
Right.
I like the first one better.
Well, that's good. You can go with the first one.
So I was just saying that's those 2.
That's right. That's the contrast. And that's an important contrast because you've hit on the 2 different names of God. Okay? Elohim, God said, we'll do this. And the other one, the Lord, Yahweh, said, I'm going to create a man. And when did Yahweh, the second story, create man? In the grand scheme of things.
The very last thing.
Yeah, in Genesis 1, it was the,
garden, here's the trees.
yeah,
Oh, that's all, are you lonesome?
yeah,
Fix you somebody.
very organized, right? And that's another distinction between those 2 accounts. The first account is day 1, it was good. Day 2, it was good. Day 3, it was good. Blah, blah, blah. Day 7, it was very good, right? And things proceeded logically. This is an indicator, most likely, of the priestly writers at work. And you can see the comparison. Remember all those little like interludes in the Old Testament where you suddenly get a genealogy? So-and-so begat so-and-so, so-and-so begat so-and-so, so-and-so married so-and-so, a female who had had something bad happen to her and begat so-and-so. Those are examples of the priestly work and probably also Deuteronomic activity in there. And I'll tell you now why. These things were written when they had been exiled from the land. The temple had been destroyed. several hundred years of a religion practice had been destroyed, 587 BCE. And the people who were the elite, who read and wrote and were concerned about religion and how it's going to be maintained and their history, were sitting along the banks of the river in Babylon worrying about how we're going to survive. We don't have a temple, we can't worship anymore. What did we do to earn the wrath of God? And so they come back and they're writing the stories of Genesis and what's happening in the world. And we get to this seventh-day Sabbath piece. And then you've got the story of being kicked out of Eden, which is a reflection again of what did we do wrong and what do we need to do to gain God's blessing. And then you've got the story of Cain and Abel and the two boys, one of them killing the other. And then you've got the story of the flood where people have just disintegrated into or degenerated into the lowest of low, and God says, I'm done with you, and then changes his mind. All of these they're stories that are highlighting what we did wrong and why God felt the need to punish or to correct. We won't use punish, we'll use correct, because God never gave up. He just tried to fix problems. So, and then,
Attention.
yeah, get your attention. So, and if you're not listening, I'm going to really get your attention. So, and then the last one, the Tower of Babel, where people are trying to make themselves into God. You know, if we build this thing tall enough, we can be with God. So those are all examples of where did we go wrong and how can we correct. And you'll see it reflected throughout whenever you're seeing passages that are identifying you did something wrong and therefore there's bad things happening to you, and now God's going to do something to bless you if you correct your errors.
And now the priestly writer comes from the priesthood. Right?
Yes.
So that's a specific group of people, some of whom can read and write, who are setting these stories down. But priests have a particular interest,
Right.
don't they, in maintaining the temple
Yeah. And that's
and
why,
supporting the king.
yes, because the king provides them the income to maintain the temple. So,
It goes very well. They walk hand in hand.
yes. And I'll come back to it. Okay, so where's my little thing? Do that. I just want to point out really quickly, if I can find my mouse. There it is. That this is the first line of Genesis. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, this is an example of the challenges of translating something from an original language to another. I told you that the Masoretes came along hundreds of years after the Old Testament books had been canonized and added a pointing system, the little dots and the triangles and stuff all around the big consonants, and the spaces between the words and the colon at the end, that means period. Okay? But there are two ways to actually read this sentence. So the translation here is, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. However, many scholars, some of which are Jewish and Hebrew scholars, believe it's also possible that the sentence actually ended a few words later. So instead of, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, it could actually be translated, in the beginning, when God created the heavens and earth, the earth was a formless void. Which suggests that the formless void was already there, and then God began to work on it. Rather than the first sentence that there was nothing there, and God created a formless void. So, very first sentence right out of the gate, we've got translation problems. And that's what I mean about not only you're having problems translating from the original into whatever language you speak, but we're having translating problems within the language itself. So, just something to...
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Who is the source of narrating that God in the beginning did this?
So, multiple people are the so are you narrating it? It's whoever is translating it. So it would have originally been passed down orally and just passed down in the original language. So if you were listening to it orally, it just depended on how your superior or your parent or whoever shared the story with you. Later on, when it was written down, it still depended on that oral translation. Even today, in the synagogue, there it is, I was stuck on Sabbath. In a synagogue today, they'll still pull out scroll to read from. So that understanding of what was written is largely passed down and then eventually translated and put on paper. You know, like the Navajo Indians didn't have a written tradition. They had an oral tradition until someone came up and made a language and turned it into a written tradition. That's the same kind of concept, and many religions are based on that. We start with an oral, and then when we've established a writing system, we try to put it into written form. The answer to your question is everyone who was reading it is the source.
But this is where did the expression what God was doing? Who was aware? Who was
aware?
Yeah.
Well,
what is
that would be the priestly group that were writing it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's the priestly group that has determined that the way we describe God is doing. God created, God spoke it, and it came into being. That's how they understood creation story. Yeah. Thank you.
Old Testament especially, if you look at it not as history, but as the change in humanity's thoughts and awareness about the divine, it traces an expansion of consciousness through time.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah.
you're looking here at one segment of humanity at a specific time who had that idea about the
Yeah.
divine.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's different from the other creation account.
Yeah.
In Genesis
Yeah.
2, they got a different...
In Genesis 2, God is...
Yes, that's what
Yeah.
Can you say that alternate translation of
Sure.
this one again?
Yeah. In the beginning, when God began to create the heavens and earth, comma, the earth was a formless void, which would be verse 2 if you look in your Bible.
I see.
And what they're saying is that somebody artificially decided, one Masorete artificially decided that verse 1 would end at the beginning, at the heavens and the earth, and start verse 2. And others say that's maybe not right.
That's really interesting because, like, with if like there was an ancient civilization before ours, like Atlantis or whatever, then that would make fit better
Yeah.
with that idea.
Yeah, that there was something there and God did something with it. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. We're going to try to move through this more quickly. All right. So, days 1, 2, and 3, God's forming and making order out of that formless void, chaos. Days 4, 5, and 6, God's filling what he just made order to. So you get the sun and the moon, you get water bringing forth living creatures and birds, and then then man is brought on the scene, and then at the end of it, day 7, God rested because he saw everything, man included, plants, birds, fish, fleas, ticks, everything was good. It was very good, and he was happy. I'm done. Okay, and the second creation count, the first thing that God does is make man. And the second thing that God does is plant the Garden of Eden for man to enjoy and to cultivate. And in this one, man is a vegetarian. Just saying. And then the last thing God does, the third creative act that God does in the second account, is provide companionship for Adamah, for man. So, a whole different way of the world coming into being. Okay, so we're going to skip from the first 11 chapters. So after man's created, then you get all their problems, and then the world just keeps falling apart and being put back together. After that, God decides, take one of those and pass it around. I'm just going to pick one man, the best one I can find out of a lot of you. And I'm going to focus all my attention on you and make you something great. And that one man is Abram, initially, Abram, Abram. And when he goes into agreement with God, he and his wife change names, and they become what we know, Abraham and Sarah. So if you look at this genealogy, I love this particular genealogy because if you're reading the Old Testament, suddenly it becomes very clear who's related to who. And they're all related to each other. So, but at least you understand why Isaac, when he had 2 sons, why Jacob went to this guy Laban, because Laban is actually his mother's brother. It's his uncle. And then he married his cousins. Okay, so let's talk about keeping it in the family. This is an example. This is part of why this genealogy is so important, and it's laid out so carefully by later writers, trying to make sure here, highlight, we're keeping it within the followers of God. We're not going out and marrying out into other groups. So, really quickly, you've got Abram. Abraham has his wife Sarah. Sarah can't have kids. Hagar becomes the person, the surrogate, I guess. Yeah, the baby mama. And she has Ishmael. And Ishmael is one of the reasons why Islam uses and includes portions of the Hebrew Scriptures, although they don't include it, but you'll find passages and pieces in the Quran. And then Sarah eventually has a baby, Isaac, and they are ecstatic. Isaac means
laughter.
Yeah, God laughed. And the reason there's laughter is because Sarah said, I'm too old to have kids. There's no way I'm having kids. And God laughed. Okay? And Yitzhak was born. So Isaac marries Rebekah, and they have twins, Jacob and Esau. Esau's the oldest, Jacob's the youngest, and in tradition, the oldest gets to inherit everything, including the father's blessing, and the youngest is the spare. So you got the heir and the spare, okay? And the spare is kind of, well, go find your own way. And Rebekah, for whatever reason, thought that Jacob was more worthy of getting all of this blessing and stuff. And so she makes it possible, through some really cool stories, for Jacob to receive, not only, Jacob receives everything. And then Jacob, in receiving everything, says, Esau's going to kill me. So he runs, and he goes to Laban, and ends up living there 20 years. He falls in love with the younger daughter, and Laban figures out how to keep free labor for 20 years and marries him to the oldest daughter first. And then finally he gets to marry Rachel, and then this brings this competition between the women and their concubines to have kids and who can please Jacob more. And so you end up with 13 children. We talk about the 12 tribes. The 13th child is Dinah, a daughter. So she didn't get to be a tribe. But the 12 tribes of Israel are formed from Jacob, thus fulfilling the covenant that God had with Abraham. Do you know what that covenant was? Has to do with the stars. Kokabim.
I'll give you as many descendants as there are stars in the sky.
That's right. All because Sarah said, I'm too old for this. And God said, I will make you prolific. And this is important because Jacob's youngest, I think it was his youngest, anyway, Jacob's son Joseph.
Benjamin was the youngest.
Yeah, Benjamin was the youngest and the apple of his father's eye, yes. So Joseph is one of the later sons, and his older brothers gang up on him because they think he's spoiled, basically. They think he's spoiled, and they end up getting him sold off into slavery. He ends up down in Egypt. As a slave in Egypt, he gains the Pharaoh, the king's attention, and the king appreciates the fact that Joseph can interpret dreams. And because of that, he is able to tell the king that there's going to be a famine and you need to prepare because it's going to bring everyone in this world to their knees. And they'll all be looking to Egypt. And so the king prepares, the famine happens, and Joseph's brothers are part of the victims of the famine, and they come to Egypt to seek food and help and discover, oh no, that brother that we abused so terribly is the one making the decisions. And so peace is restored in the family. And the family moves to Egypt. And this sets the scene for Exodus. They come to Egypt. The family is well received because Joseph is the apple of the Pharaoh's eye. And for a few generations, everything's copacetic. God's good. The king loves these people. But over time, they stay in Egypt for 400 years, reproducing and multiplying. And over time, the pharaohs are not looking upon these people so kindly. And so eventually they become enslaved. And that sets the stage for Exodus. Now really quickly, down at the bottom right, at the bottom of that red line to the right, that's Ur. That's where Abraham came from. And he came all the way up to where that arrow is pointing, that's Haran. It's a 400-mile journey that he made. And then his Jacob makes his travel back to Haran, which is where Laban lives. And that's from Beersheba, which is south of Jerusalem, and that's a 450-mile journey. Just so you can kind of get an idea of the amount of travel that we're talking about here. It's a 2 or 3 week travel on foot. Okay, one other thing to quickly, I just went through that genealogy. The thing to remember about these genealogies is that they're old. And you can tell they're old stories brought, back from an oral tradition because you can see fragments of them multiple times in the Old Testament. Abraham tried to pass off Sarah as a sister at least 3 times in order to gain the good graces of a king. If you read the Bible literally, most likely it's the same story that different groups of people were telling their version of. Rebekah passed off Jacob as Esau in order to gain the blessings. Rachel does some trickery of her own. She hides the household gods so that she can gain her father's favor. All of these things are examples of trickster tales. And we look at the trickster tales because these are stories of the underdog. And that's what these people were originally. They were tribes, outsiders coming in, trying to fit within a greater realm, and they couldn't follow the rules of the, how to get ahead. They didn't have the daddy's $1 million inheritance, right? So they were coming in and trying to make their way the best they could, and the way they did that was by being cunning, by tricking. And if you were successful, it was heroic. And so all these stories are showing early oral traditions about how people came into the land and how they survived in the land. And this is going to change because later on you're going to see Deuteronomic stories. We're not talking about the trickster anymore. In fact, the later authors are kind of embarrassed about the trickery that's going on, especially with Abraham passing off his wife as a sister. And they go in and they try to massage the story so it's not quite so embarrassing or offensive. So that's going on. Just keep that in mind if you're reading along. I'm going to probably need to skip this if we're going to get through in time. Okay, so just briefly to say there are at least 7 covenants in the Old Testament and the New Testament. And by a covenant, I mean an agreement between a person or a people and God. It's not a contract, which is also an agreement between 2 parties, but a covenant, the main thing to remember about a covenant is that one of the 2 parties is more powerful than the other, and the goal of the covenant is to be supportive and trusting. There's no outs in the covenant, like if you screw up, this is over, the contract's nullified. The covenant is based on trust. And if you can't fulfill your part of the agreement, the other is going to hold you anyway until you can. In a contract, if you can't fulfill your part of the agreement, like if you have an apartment rental, you're out, right? So there's a difference. And it's important to remember when you're reading about covenants, this isn't a contract between 2 people. It's an expression of love and trust. And often they come with, here's proof of our covenant, circumcision being one of the earliest examples of proof. The rainbow is another example of proof of a covenant that you get from the Noah, the story of Noah. Okay, so here we go. We've gotten to Egypt. We're a huge group of people now. The kings are a little concerned that we're more populous than the Egyptians. We've got to do something about this, and so they enslave the Hebrew people. And so the next big name to rise up, do you know? Moses. And I'm not going to go into all, Moses, good grief, Disney, I think, or Pixar. Somebody did a movie about Moses. So did Charles.
He played Heston.
Yeah, Heston played Moses. I hated that. It was like every Easter, a 4-hour movie. Do we have to watch this as a kid? But anyway. So the big thing to remember about, well, there's a few things. Moses was called by Yahweh, Lord, okay? The one God. This is the God that says, I'm all powerful, I'm all present, and I'm all knowing. And I know you, Moses. And Moses is like, oh boy, I can't do this. And this is the first sign of a prophet. I'm not good enough for this. Don't ask me. So the important piece of this burning bush, though, is, do you remember Moses was told to do something?
Take your shoes off.
Take your shoes off. Why is that important?
Holy ground.
Yeah, Deb takes her shoes off before she goes in anywhere. Holiness is another key component, not anywhere, but in the church, is a key component of what is going to unfold here. It's one of these specific pieces of Jewish religion is holiness, purity. And the reason isn't because God's pure and we're not. It's because if you're less pure and you come in contact with pure, bad things can happen to you. And it's not like it's because you're bad. It's because you're just not as pure.
And it's good for grounding, too, just to...
Yes, yeah. And in energy work, when we're trying, like on Saturdays, I'm working with people on the table and we're doing energy work, moving into a higher vibration brings you closer to that level of purity, and you're able to accomplish more from a spiritual perspective. But that's a very our modern piece. In the Old Testament, it was all about who's pure and who's not. And that unfolds through the rest of the 5 books about what's pure and what's not. How do you maintain purity? How do you get pure again if you've been impure? To the point where there's even religious purity. The Levites are the only ones that can do certain things. So just remember, purity is it's equivalent to holiness.
Right, yeah. It's fascinating that they had so many practices that they didn't have the scientific explanation for, but it was still like that just through trial and error they arrived at the things that were effective.
Right, like washing. It's important to wash. Well, yes, and we know now bacteria, if you don't wash, you get sick. So, an example. Okay, so the big story in Moses' life was the showdown between Moses and the Pharaoh. Moses finally said, okay, after God asked him 5 times and wore him down, he finally said, okay, I'll be your prophet. But somebody else needs to speak for me. And incidentally, they have found some sacred pottery where the lip has been intentionally broken off. And I can't remember, it's been too long since we studied this, but there's something about it's related to Moses, and they wonder if Moses had a hair lip, and that's why he didn't want to be in front of people and speak. So, just an interesting little aside. So there's a showdown between Moses and Pharaoh's magicians. And we have these 10 plagues. And I'm not going to get into them all now. Just, I want to point out that today in our modern world, we do not understand that water into blood, frogs, gnats, flies, livestock, boils, thunder and hail, locusts, darkness, all of those, each of these plagues is representing an Egyptian god. We didn't know that. The whole point of we don't know that unless we're Egyptian scholars. The whole point of these plagues was so that God could show, I'm stronger than any of your gods, or all of them put together. That's the whole point of Exodus, is to show who God is in the world and the power of God over all other gods. And you come out of that with the 10 Commandments, which I'm going to skip forward to. And those 10 Commandments are the Moses covenant, all right? And those 10 Commandments are about, the first 4 are about how you and I relate to each other. I am your one God. And I know you, I love you, and I'm going to take care of you. So don't put any other gods before me. Don't put any other gods before me in the shape of idols. Don't misuse my name. And here's a positive one. Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Ties us right back to Genesis 1. Okay? So now we know there's a Deuteronomic later writer putting something in to explain these 10 Commandments. The second half of the 10 Commandments are about how you get along with each other in the community. So first, there's only 2 positive ones in the 10 Commandments, the 4 and 5. The 5th one is honor your parents. And the rest are don't kill each other, don't cheat on each other, don't steal from each other, don't lie about each other, and don't lust after everything that's not yours.
I never thought of that, because the same thing's true in astrology. Like the first 6 signs are focused on the self.
Mm-hmm.
And
On the outer, yeah. And I will point out, this is one of my favorite key pieces, is think about the great commandment that Jesus gave. What was the great commandment?
Love
God with everything you've got, and love your neighbor as yourself. And then the last piece of that statement, if you do these, you fulfill the law. So I think I'm going to stop with that. We're at 10:30. But just remember that Jesus just upped the ante and said, don't just get along, love. So that's where we're going to stop today. That's basically what you need to get out of the first 5 books. Numbers and Leviticus and Deuteronomy are smatterings of history. Of course, the Hebrew people didn't just get into the land after Moses led them out of Egypt. They were stubborn, they disagreed, God got ticked off, said, well, we're just going to wait for another generation then. I'll take you in after you all are done living, and we'll take in a group that's obedient. So, and that's the upshot of Numbers. And then Deuteronomy and Leviticus are smatterings of history, but mostly laying out what do we have to do to maintain our relationship with Yahweh. Okay? So after that, they finally enter the land. Next week, that's what we'll be looking at. Okay?